Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 22nd of May now. As always, we encourage you to visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter under NWS Alaska, NWS Anchorage, NWS Fairbanks, or NWS Juneau for the latest information through the Twitterverse. On Facebook as NWS Alaska, and on YouTube you'll get your daily afternoon map briefings there on our NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks channels. And after this show, you can find the complete broadcast, if that suits your needs, from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org, or simply go to YouTube and search for AKWX-TV, Alaska Weather TV for short. Let's get right to it. Every single area colored here in red right now is under a red flag warning, at least until 10 o'clock tonight, and there's a pretty good chance that many of these same areas will be back under red flag warnings again tomorrow. That does include the western Kenai Peninsula, including the Funny River fire. It also includes areas just north of Fairbanks under the Dalton Highway fire, the Dalton River area, and many areas that are not on fire right now but are very, very let's say dangerously close to having those tinderbox conditions if they don't already, because of either wind or low humidity. Today is primarily due to the low humidity, and it looks like a lot of those trends are going to continue. That goes for areas in the north from Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley to the Yukon Valley and west toward Ambler, southward along line toward Galena, and all the way out toward the YK Delta, including southwest Alaska there. Right now, conditions have eased somewhat around Kodiak Island and around Prince William Sound, and again, those conditions will likely continue at least for the next couple days. We're not expecting any major threat of rain or development of a whole lot of water to ease those conditions really anytime soon. The Funny River wildfire smoke, including smoke from the Tyonek fire as well, just across the Cook Inlet region, has put a lot of smoke into the atmosphere around the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island. We've been watching this for days. We've showed you a few of these pictures on Facebook and on Twitter and here on the show. The first day, we really saw a very clear plume jutting out into the Gulf of Alaska. Over the last couple days, low pressure has weakened and the winds have been a little bit more light, variable, and perhaps a little bit more unfocused, but you can still see that milky grayish color spreading out and now spreading down the Alaska Peninsula, heading toward Sand Point. Now, does that mean your community is going to have a lot of smoke? It's hard to say really just yet, but if you're a pilot, you need to consider that, especially heading into the holiday weekend here, if you're flying southward, you need to make sure you're up on the latest flight restrictions, especially over the Kenai Peninsula, and any flight category restrictions due to poor visibility across the Kenai Peninsula. Now, most folks aren't flying out into the middle of the Gulf, but the wildfire smoke around the Kenai Peninsula has been pretty substantial, so make sure you check on what those conditions mean for you before you leave the tarmac and go wheels up. Here's fire danger now, and across the state, as we saw with the red flag warnings, that's the immediate threat, what's happening right now until about 10 o'clock or so. This is what we see for tomorrow. Pretty high fire danger all the way up the upper Yukon, down through the middle and lower Yukon valleys. Relatively extreme fire danger on the western side of the Alaska Range, for the Mat-Su Valley, for the Anchorage Bowl, and for just about all of the Kenai Peninsula there, again, at the extreme level. And that high fire danger corridor seems to be expanding a little bit more, especially in the north. So as things continue to be pretty dry, the fire danger is going to stay right up there. So make sure you're doing your part. If you haven't worked around your property just yet to reduce the impact of fire and fuels around your home, that would be a really good idea to do that now before it gets critical closer to your home and village. Here's a look out to the west, and the storm track remains well to the south of Alaska. The main corridor for storms and things with moisture, again, pretty much down here coming out of the tropical Pacific. And moving off of eastern Asia, we've got another area of high pressure, the same area really, right across the southern Bering Sea. That's working to pump moisture northward, but really allowing most of the storm track to stay well to our south. So you don't see anything zipping right here along the Aleutians as we would in the wintertime. That move right into the Gulf and then start pumping that moisture right up into places that really need precipitation at this point. Looking at the visible satellite picture, keep your eye right here around Cordova. Let's see if we can pick this up here. A little bit of a blossoming late in the afternoon. See those bright white spots right there? That would be, as far as we know, the first thunderstorm of the season for South Central. For Southeast, got a little bit of rain today, and the further south you go, especially around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, Annette. Yeah, you sound like you got a dousing today, and more heavy rain still in the forecast there, it looks like. So with a nice moisture feed for you, you're getting the wet weather that the rest of the state needs, but for right now, it's really locked up right here across the southern parts of Southeast. And a little bit of that apparently popped up very close to Cordova. So if you heard a few thunder rumbles earlier this afternoon, that's probably what that was. Those 3 tiny clouds right over Cordova probably dumped, at least for a few minutes there. Up across the north, north of Fairbanks, you can see some low clouds, some of that creeping over the Brooks Range, low clouds and snow across a good part of the Arctic coast. Out to the west, nothing but clear, dry conditions from Nome southward through Norton Sound, Bristol Bay, and then westward you're back into the Bering Sea fog monster again from St. Paul to Adak to Shemya. Widespread areas of fog, stratus, and probably some drizzle and at least a little bit of light rain from time to time. Overall, though, the moisture that you see wrapping into Southeast, a lot of this is really drying up. If we see anything blossoming out of this, chances are it will be high terrain, mountaintop showers there. And most of what we saw right there around Cordova came right off the hills, so it really didn't look like it was anything major at all. It's very isolated activity. For the moment, anything around the Alaska Range, the Talkeetnas and northward, that's the best chance for any precipitation. So by and large, what we're looking at is a clear, dry situation for most of Alaska late this afternoon. High pressure across the northern Yukon, feeding in that dry air coming off the continent and sweeping all the way down the YK deltas and out to sea. Low pressure here feeding in that moisture to southeast. Again, some of that occasionally heavy today. High pressure across the Bering, locking in the low clouds and stable air. As we head into tonight, a spot shower or so across the Copper River Basin, maybe again the high terrain, maybe a few showers offshore of Kodiak Island. The focus for precipitation is really going to be on southern parts of Southeast, the Dixon Entrance, Haida Gwaii, northward. Cold front trying to work over the Brooks Range. It's not going to make it. It looks like it's going to fall apart more than anything else. In areas of light snow may continue in that area. Some of that just showery, all in all, north of the Yukon Valley. Now, high pressure across the Bering, 1,027 millibars, is dragging up that wetter air from the North Pacific and feeding it into the Kamchatka Peninsula and staying generally well south of the Gulf of Anadyr. Other than that, it's just low cloud stratus and fog for the central Bering and most of the central and western chain. A lot of that heavier cloud cover seems to just waver right around Nikolsky and Dutch Harbor in Alaska. Most of that's not reaching the Alaska Peninsula at all. By Friday, you can see a little bit of a shift in that stratus field. Other than that, cold air is still trying to muscle its way over the Brooks Range. And again, it really doesn't look like it's got a whole lot of oomph to make it. It's pretty shallow stuff. Fog, light snow, maybe some flurries there. Otherwise, mixing in with rain, perhaps just across the border from about Old Crow to almost Arctic Village. A lot of this is going to be falling apart and moving eastward. A few showers, perhaps, along the eastern Alaska Range. And then most of that, again, really focused on southeast with any chance for some heavier rainfall hovering across some of the southern inner waterways, most of that around Misty Fjords, and a lot of that really starting to fall apart as the focus for that lift and heavier rainfall subsides somewhat. Low pressure across the southern Gulf at 1,010 millibars, so we'll focus a little bit of light rain there well offshore of anywhere around Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, or Kodiak Island. And as we get into Saturday, things are really drying up once again. We'll have cloud cover around from time to time. Maybe some afternoon showers, some of that really focusing on central and southern parts of Southeast as we get into the first part of the holiday weekend. But more than anything else, it's probably going to be smoke for South Central, occasional cloud cover across the west, a wealth of cloud cover across the north, and any focus for precipitation won't be until perhaps Saturday across the western chain there with a new occluded front working its way in from the North Pacific. And again, time will tell on exactly what kind of track that will hold for us. Looking at the temperatures across Southeast then, with rain, well, you would expect cooler temperatures, and there you go, upper 40s there for some of the southern parts of Southeast, including places like Annette and Ketchikan. Hyder was holding on to 52 there. Juneau considerably warmer at 60 and drier weather there. Apparently the sun was out, so hopefully folks had a great day there. 53 in Yakutat, Prince William Sound, upper 50s around Valdez. Cordova showing 60 degrees, 66 around Seward. Homer 51, Kenai 62, 1 degree behind that in Anchorage, 59 in Talkeetna. Mid-50s for Fairbanks, warming up nicely there today. 45 in Eagle, just shy of 50 in Northway. Fort Yukon was at 46 degrees late this afternoon. Arctic Village a little bit cooler at 37 with clouds in Anaktuvuk Pass, 30 degrees, 20s and 30s for the Arctic coast. Barrow and Atkasuk both at 29 degrees with Kaktovik showing low 30s. Kotzebue Sound in the lower 30s. Kivalina was 32, Kotzebue 33, and Shishmaref a colder 27. 42 in Nome this afternoon, about the same there in Unalakleet. 60 degrees in Bethel, pretty mild day for you. 57 in McGrath with Sparrowvon showing temps in the mid-50s late today. Low 60s around Bristol Bay for both Dillingham and King Salmon. 54 in Kodiak. Low to mid-50s for the Alaska Peninsula. 43 in Dutch Harbor and Alaska. The Pribilovs in the upper 30s. Adak, Aka, and Shemya also in the 40s. Overnight low temperatures then will hover in the lower 40s for a good part of Southwest and the chain. 36 in St. Paul, 34 for Nunivak Island. Nome 30 degrees, Barrow 20. Fairbanks looking at temps above freezing tonight. South of the Alaska Range, expect overnight lows in the upper 30s to lower 40s. A mild night for South Central and the Kenai Peninsula. 47 around Kodiak and low to mid 40s for a good part of Southeast, with highs tomorrow approaching but probably not making 60 degrees for you as conditions dry up just a little bit. Mid to upper 50s for a good part of the interior, including the middle Tanana Valley. Tanana itself at 58. McGrath showing 61. Norton Sound temps in the mid 40s. Southwest mid to upper 60s in fact. And 40s, 50s, and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula with the coldest weather from the Pribilovs to Attu. 36 in St. Lawrence Island. And we're going to say one more, 27 in Barrow there. So there's your cold spot. Flying weather, IFR conditions expected across the coastal plain all the way out toward Kaktovik and generally north of Adigan and Anaktuvuk Pass. Once you get south of the high terrain, though, conditions should improve like that. So this is a very shallow air mass. But out to the west, IFR conditions hover across a large part of the Bering and generally west of Adak. You'll also see a swath of IFR extending off the Kenai Peninsula. Chances are that is going to float around a little bit and maybe at times getting closer to Kodiak, at times getting a little bit closer to Prince William Sound. This is generally from the fire there, the Funny River fire around Soldotna. So watch for that again if you're flying, and make sure you include that in your weekend flying plans. For Southeast, MVFR conditions at least for the southern half, let's say, of Southeast, simply due to the rain chances and low clouds there. Here's your pass conditions. And so as we were talking about with the colder air trying to make it over the pass, that's going to lock in a lot of low clouds north of the summit. So MVFR at least for Anaktuvuk, probably IFR at times north of that high terrain. On the south side, things look pretty good. MVFR conditions for Adigan Pass. Then Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be just fine. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass should be VFR all the way through. Isabel Pass expected to be VFR. Mentasta and Tanita Pass are looking good for your day tomorrow. Flying through Portage Pass looks just fine. VFR conditions should prevail there. And Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to be VFR. Freezing levels then, the warmer air is trying to work its way northward, and you can see that starting to work through the Bering Strait. You've got a little bit of cooler air working its way down through the Yukon, and as a result you can see that freezing line dipping closer and closer to Haines and Skagway. Out to the west you can see the upper level warm air pushing northward once again. Freezing lines as high as 6, 8, and 10,000 feet just south of Adak and Atka. We do not expect any significant icing tomorrow, though. The light to isolated moderate chances remain well to the west of Alaska, so at this point no major threat for any icing. Sure, there's always room for a spot or two. Tomorrow's jet stream shows that trough of low pressure across the Arctic, pushing in northwesterly winds from the Chukchi seacoast. Those are as strong as 60 knots there. Ridging really controlling most of our weather at this point. That across the Bering Sea, and in front of that, a trough of low pressure across the western Gulf and south of Kodiak Island. That is working to keep nothing but dry air right over the state. The main storm track coming in south of that high pressure system and then joining up again with the ridge just west of the continental United States. That onshore flow is keeping wet weather focused on the Pacific Northwest and keeping dry weather again in place right over the 49th. At 9,000 feet, high pressure sitting across the Aleutians is keeping that light westerly flow and southwesterly flow coming in across the Bering Sea. By the time it makes it to western Alaska, it's dried out substantially, and working in from the north and west, light at 15 knots. You'll see those winds at 9,000 feet over places like Bristol Bay to remain pretty steady and fairly light. A westerly flow cutting across the interior, around 20 knots can be seen there, and more of a south and southwesterly flow coming into southeast Alaska is only blowing at about 10 knots. At 3,000 feet, of course, the pressure centers are pretty close today. Wind speeds across the interior remain very light, only 5 to 10 knots in most cases. High pressure sitting pretty much in the same spot here at 3,000 feet, blowing in southerlies across Attu and northerlies coming in from Unalaska Dutch Harbor and across Sand Point and Cold Bay and Falls Pass. Winds are pretty light across the Gulf as well, which is one reason when we were looking at that satellite picture, you notice that smoke kind of spread out in lots of different directions. Well, it wasn't getting any one directional push one way or the other, so it can just kind of go where it wants. And with winds only at 5 knots or so, that's pretty easy to do. Turbulence potential then, looking at the Brooks Range, you'll see a light, isolated moderate. That's going to be in the vicinity of that cold front, so as you're working through that, you might run into a little bit of chop. Some pockets of turbulence expected across the central and northern parts of the Bering Sea, and with winds coming across occasionally a little bit stronger from the north through some of that channel terrain. Don't be surprised to run into a few bumps there if you're flying on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Generally speaking, though, there is not a major focus for turbulence or icing, as you saw, across most of Alaska. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your weather update and again a look at your marine forecast here in just a few minutes.
Triangles, Triangles, Part 2. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plot Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
Summer is almost here, and our favorite winter constellations are almost gone. But don't despair, we have 2 snazzy triangles that are going to dazzle the night sky.
That's right, James. One of the triangles you see every summer, but the other one is formed by a unique arrangement of planets.
Wondering what we're talking about? Let's show you.
Okay, we have our skies set for any time this week just after sunset. If you look to the west, you'll see our favorite constellations of the winter season bidding us a fond farewell. The giant planet Jupiter will be among the stars of the Gemini twins. And if you haven't had an opportunity to view Jupiter in the early evening, you better hurry, because in just a few weeks, Jupiter will be caught in the glare of the sun and it'll reappear in the morning sky.
If you face east, you'll spot the first triangle you can see tonight. The northernmost point in the triangle is a star that appears high in the sky every year at this time. It's the orange star Arcturus, the brightest star in Boötes the Herdsman. You can find it easily by using the stars of the Big Dipper. Take the 3 stars in the handle of the Big Dipper and trace out an arc moving away from the Big Dipper's bowl, and you'll land almost directly on Arcturus. We call this arcing to Arcturus. The star is so bright because it's only 37 light years away from us. But it's also 26 times wider and over 113 times brighter than the sun.
The second point in our triangle is just up and to the right of Arcturus. It's the red planet Mars, and it's right next to the star Porrima, one of the bright stars in Virgo. Mars is fairly close to us right now, so through a good telescope you might be able to make out some dark surface patterns. This, of course, depends on whether or not there's a planet-wide dust storm happening on Mars. Mars was named after the Roman god of war because the red color of this planet reminded many ancient people of blood and violence.
And the last part of our triangle is formed by the second largest planet in our solar system, the ringed planet Saturn. Saturn is in an excellent spot for viewing right now, and its rings are tipped toward us in such a way that if you have a small telescope, you'll get a picture-perfect view of a planet that Galileo first described as having ears. Saturn achieved opposition just a few weeks ago, so it is bigger and brighter than it will be for the rest of the year. So definitely get outside and check it out.
So there you have it, an almost perfect triangle formed by a star, Arcturus, and 2 bright planets, Mars and Saturn.
Alrighty, let's take a look at our second triangle for the evening. Okay, we have our skies set to midnight, and if you look east, you'll see the 3 brilliant stars of the summer triangle having just risen over the eastern horizon. Vega is the brightest star of Lyra the Harp, Deneb is the brightest star of Cygnus the Swan, and Altair is the brightest star of Aquila the Eagle.
The brightest star in the triangle is Vega, and it's only 25 light years from Earth. And along with Arcturus, Vega is one of the most luminous stars in our neighborhood.
The second brightest star in the summer triangle is Altair, and it's only 17 light years from Earth. Of all the stars near us, Altair spins the fastest. At its equator, Altair can make one complete rotation in only 9 hours. Compare that to our Sun, which takes 26 days to complete one rotation.
The last star of the summer triangle is the blue-white supergiant Deneb. Deneb is almost 60,000 times as bright as our Sun. However, because it's almost 3,000 light years away from us, it appears much fainter than Vega and Altair.
So, there you have it. 2 bright triangles to light up your night sky. Arcturus, Mars, and Saturn.
And the ever-popular and lovely summer triangle, Vega, Altair, and Deneb.
Okay, my friends, out under the sky with you, and remember, whatever you do,
Keep
looking up.
Time for a look at southeast marine weather forecast. Winds will be light inside the Lynn Canal, coming in from a southerly direction that will develop during the day. More of a westerly flow across Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage. Northwesterlies in response to low pressure working its way into British Columbia. 15 knots on the inside. On the coastal waters, you're looking at 20 to 25 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas. And westerlies from Yakutat down to the northern entrances, 15 to 20 knots with 5 to 7 foot seas there. Now, as you get into Saturday, winds should be a little more light and even variable outside of Yakutat and Gustavus, 5 knots if that, and more of an offshore flow coming in from the southeast and then becoming more easterly with time. 10 knots there heading up towards Sitka with 5 to 6 foot seas. And the inner waterways, you're looking at 10-knot winds coming into the north now for the north and south Lynn Canal. More of a southeasterly flow coming in across the Clarence and Chatham Straits there and Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage, 10 to 15 knots with about 3 foot seas expected for Saturday in the beginning of the holiday weekend. Northerlies on Friday coming down the Cook Inlet. And for those of you considering the smoke, at least around the Anchorage area and the Mat-Su Bowl, the latest thinking was that winds will be out of the north for a good part of tonight. Now, after the overnight hours set in a little bit, we'll probably have an inversion set up which will trap some of that smoke, and if winds become light, some of that smoke from the Funny River fire could work its way northward once again and kind of linger around the Anchorage Bowl and maybe the Mat-Su Bowl. As long as we have a stronger north flow, that probably won't be much of an issue. The winds as we get into Saturday will likely come back in from the south, so that presents a different issue. Northwesterlies will be a little bit stronger across the Barren Islands, 15 to 20 knots with 4 foot seas. Variable flow inside of Shelikof Strait, and westerlies east of Kodiak Island. Look at northerly winds up to 15 knots on Friday with 3 foot seas inside Prince William Sound. Outside, the winds are a little bit more variable and light at 10 knots with a 4 foot sea. There's Saturday. You can see those southerly winds returning to the Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots there over the water. Inside Prince William Sound, a southeasterly flow. Variable winds outside of the Sound with 5 foot seas, 4 foot seas on the eastern side of the Barren Islands, 3 foot seas to the west with variable winds and light winds on either side of Kodiak Island with only a 3 foot sea. Northwesterlies coming across the Alaska Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots, 3 to 5 foot seas on the Bering side, 5 foot seas on the Pacific side. By Saturday, winds are still blowing pretty much the same direction. One change though, south of Sand Point, you're looking at westerlies at 15 knots with a 4 foot sea, and seas diminish somewhat across the Bering side down to 4 feet by Saturday afternoon. On Friday, variable winds north of Adak, Atka, and Nikolsky, 10 knots there with a 4 foot sea. Well, you're still looking at northerlies around 15 to 20 knots on the Pacific side. Northwesterlies a hair stronger north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 5 foot seas there, and more of a southeasterly flow around Attu and Shemya, 20 knots with a 4 foot sea. That picks up to 11 feet as we head into Saturday. Southeasterlies also coming up there around Kiska, 25 knots with a 9 foot sea. And we get back into our southerly flow there for Adak, Atka, Nikolsky, and even Unalaska getting grazed by some of that. The winds are a little more variable right under that ridge of high pressure, and then south of the chain there, you're looking at winds becoming northwesterly at 15 knots with a 4 foot sea. For the west coast, an onshore flow steady from the west all the way from St. Matthew to Nunivak Island and north to St. Lawrence Island there as the ice continues to erode, although we hear it's out of Norton Sound now. Freezing spray is possible in those areas. Otherwise, south of Nunivak Island and for the Pribilofs, 15 to 20 knots from the north with a 4-foot sea. That becomes light and variable as you head into Saturday around the Pribilofs, northwesterlies, and the Kuskokwim Bay at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. And you get that return flow from the south and west across St. Matthew, 15 knots from 3-foot sea, and westerlies continue around St. Lawrence Island up to 20 knots there. For the Arctic coast, you're looking at northerlies pretty much from Kaktovik all the way around to Barrow, Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, and into Kotzebue Sound around 10 knots, with one exception north of Dead Horse and Kaktovik. That's about 20 knots, but even that improves going into Saturday. Winds become light and variable, generally from the west. 5 knots there, more of an east flow around Barrow, Wainwright down toward Cape Lisburne, about 5 to 10 knots. And then you have your exception, of course, in Kotzebue Sound, a westerly flow, also around 10 knots. But winds across the Arctic coast for the beginning of the holiday weekend expected to be pretty light. Here's a recap of tonight's weather and going ahead into your Saturday. Cold front coming into the Arctic coast brings a little bit of light snow, probably a shift in the wind direction and colder weather, keeping temps in the 20s there for most areas along the coast. Most of the precipitation will likely be snow north of the Brooks Range. South of that, it's going to mix a little bit with rain and snow and should really thin out very quickly. In fact, only spotty showers across some of the higher terrain for the Copper River Basin. We saw a thunderstorm today around Cordova that popped right off the mountains. We've got smoke spreading into the Gulf of Alaska and around the Kenai Peninsula. So once again, pilots, factor that into your decision making if you've got plans to fly anywhere on the Kenai Peninsula or southward going into tomorrow or certainly Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. Cold front's trying to make it across the high terrain in the Brooks Range, not going to have much of an impact southward. We'll see rain focusing on southern parts of southeast. Some of that may still be heavy tonight and again tomorrow, but that seems to really be focused on places like Ketchikan, Annette, and Metlakatla. Southward, you've got a zone of low pressure sitting south of the Gulf with high pressure in the west. That means low clouds, fog, and stratus continue there. With a new disturbance coming in from the North Pacific, that could reach the western Aleutians by early in the weekend. Looks like it will have to punch through a very stable, rough, tough, and hard to bluff high pressure system there is sneaking a little bit eastward as we start up the weekend. Otherwise, dry conditions, more clouds than anything else across most of Alaska at this point, with a chance of a snow shower working its way into the North Yukon. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.